Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. It is your girl, Marcie Thomas, and I am really excited to be here with you for another episode of Live Well Sister. So, this one is going to be really powerful. Actually, all of them are, but this one is especially so because we're going to dive into ways that we can really make sure that our hearts and minds and spirits are always in the best possible place. So, by means of introduction, I am the founder of Brown Girl Collective, which is almost 15 years old. So I'm really excited about the things that are forthcoming for this 15th year anniversary. But I'm coming to you from the outskirts of Atlanta, where I just really love being able to join you and have conversations with women from across the globe, actually, that talk about things that pertain to our ability to live well. Because if you saw that introduction, you can see there are a lot of ways or a lot of things that living well can entail. But if our hearts and minds and spirits are not in the right place, a lot of those other things may not even be possible or probable. So as you're coming in and joining us, please let us know where you are connecting with us from. And we look forward to having a dialogue with you this evening. So I am excited because our guest is here. It's her second time here with her second New York Times best-selling book. And our guest for the evening is Cole Arthur Riley, who is a writer, poet, and author of New York Times bestsellers, two New York Times bestsellers. The first one which she discussed a couple years ago, This Here Flesh, and now Black Liturgies. And her writing has been featured in The Atlantic, Guernica, the Boston Globe, and the Washington Post. She is also the creator of Black Liturgies, which you may see or follow online, which is a space that integrates spiritual practice with Black emotion, Black literature, and the Black body, and a project of the Center for Dignity and Contemplation, where she serves as curator. So without any further delay, let's welcome Cole to Live Well, Sister. Welcome.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yes, as I mentioned before we came on, I'm so excited to have you back again. And, congratulations on your second New York Times bestseller. That's pretty big.
Thank you.
Yes, yes. Oh, we got somebody joining us from Mississippi. Okay, somebody else from Oklahoma. So I know you're in upstate New York, so we have quite a few places represented already. So now this is your second time around with, a wonderful book, something that's here to serve the community. So how does it feel this time versus the first time?
It feels good. It feels a little more comfortable because I
Mm,
think because this book comes out of the project that I started online, and that community of kind of Black liturgies has always been just so receptive and generous with my work. It feels like it's landing in safe arms, and yeah.
yeah, yeah, and it definitely is something that's very powerful. I know a lot of people who are, on the Instagram space that they're sharing the things that you're talking about. They're having conversations about it. So I just think that it's really powerful for you to have created something, starting with your own journey and then being able to take that and then share it with others. So one of the things that I do know is that it does come from a personal place. So what was it what was your journey like in terms of spirituality that led you to want to start this and then begin sharing it with others?
Mhm. Yeah, so I wasn't raised in a religious home. Like, we didn't grow up, you know, praying or reading the Bible or anything like that. And it wasn't really until college that I started going to a church consistently with a friend of mine, and we had done no research about the church. No one We just went to the most obvious looking church on campus, in the middle of campus, and, it happened to be a predominantly white, fairly conservative church, and, I stayed there for 4 years,
Mm,
in search of community. I think especially young adults are kind of trying to find a place for I'll speak for myself. I was looking for a place to belong, and I sacrificed a lot of myself during that season in order to belong in those spaces. Simultaneously, I was encountering a lot of kind of the great Black novelists for the first time
Mm,
in college. I'd never read Toni Morrison in high school, never encountered James Baldwin, Alice Walker, Zora Neale Hurston. All of them were completely new to me, and I was encountering their voices and stories in the classroom for the first time, at the same time that I was encountering this kind of religious world and doctrine for the first time, and it was very hard for me to just separate the two. For
mhm,
me, it was all just this new experience, this new world of college, and I found myself really drawn to the spirituality of Black literature and
mm,
feeling that it was really expansive and stranger and less about telling, Toni Morrison's not really trying to tell you exactly what to believe about God, but she does write characters who are having experiences with the divine and invisible, sacred things and God, and, I found myself drawn to that kind of expression of spirituality, and, by the time after college, I left kind of that religious space I was in, and, the summer of 2020, I had found myself in a more liturgical Christian space, more progressive, but traditional in the sense of it was tied to liturgy, which I
mhm.
found beautiful and, connected with me as a writer. But in the summer of 2020, I was looking for a kind of liturgy and written connection with God that felt close to the Black interior world, as
Mhm.
opposed to the ones that were written by white men. And so I started Black Liturgies as a digital project at first, and, that led into the book.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that because, it helps us to understand where it comes from. So you're not that person who grew up, in a certain faith, having a certain faith journey is something that you found on your own. And I can relate to that as well because, there were times growing up where my family and I went to church, but we were not the people who were always in church and all those sorts of things. So it's definitely something that as an adult, I was able to find. And like you have kind of, navigated my way into determining how I choose to exercise my faith or have an interior spiritual life. So thank you so much for sharing that. Now, for those who may not understand or know or be familiar with the term of liturgy, what exactly does liturgy mean?
Right. So liturgy, the kind of exact Greek word, the translation is work of the people or work for the people, and it's the word used for, like, these forms for connecting with God. So a lot of people will think of, like a Catholic rite or a Catholic Eucharist service if you've, been to one or watched one in film or something like that. That structure and recitation of the words would be the liturgy. But it also can be used for much more than that. That's kind of the clearest example, I think, is in Catholic and Anglican Episcopal church services, but it's really any kind of form, any kind of way, structure of connecting with the divine.
Right. And I think, as you were saying that, and I think of in a lot of Black churches, call and response, because
Mhm.
oftentimes there may be readings that, you have in church, and, the pastor or, whoever the worship leader reads a certain portion, and then there's a certain portion for the congregants to follow up. So is that a parallel?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's something about it that is rooted in the collective and this collective voice. And sometimes that's call and response, where there's one voice that's leader and other voices as followers. And of course, I think that forms us in different ways to have to be the follower or at times maybe take the role of the caller or the leader. So I think, yes, liturgy, at least as I've experienced it, and as I enjoy it to be, has to do with that shared voice and that exchange.
And based upon the where you kind of came into your spiritual journey, you weren't hearing Black voices, either Black or women or queer or whatever these other intersections that we may have that don't necessarily speak to us. And that's what I think is so powerful about your work because it does legitimately speak to things that we can relate to, because the way we experience spirituality or God, in whatever form that is, may be different from what someone else's experience is.
Mhm. And certainly our experiences of things like grief and rage and fear and, like, those shared stories of what it means to be human, I think to have them written about from the particularity of a Black voice is important. There are beautiful, books and, I can think of many prayer books in Anglican tradition. You have the Book of Common Prayer, which was written by a white man named Thomas Cranmer at a time when my ancestors were being abducted and enslaved. I have a complicated relationship to that kind of text. I've read it, I've recited it from a church pew, and there are seasons where it just doesn't connect, where I don't think Thomas Cranmer is capable of speaking to Black inner life in a credible way, in a meaningful way. So I think it's important that we have kind of um, words coming out of the Black interior pointed toward, the divine, the sacred God, whatever that looks like for people.
Mhm. And one thing in the book, and we'll talk about the structure of it here, but you're telling your stories, you're sharing your journeys, but there's also opportunity for us to see ourselves in the stories that you are telling. So how important was it for you to make sure that people understand that this is coming from your point of view, but yet it's some things that could be used universally as well?
Yeah, it was important because, well, I'll take it back to Thomas Cranmer. So that's a book that's written entirely by him out of his own inner life, but there's no real acknowledgement of that in church history. There's no real reckoning with how that limits the text. And so when I wrote this, I wanted to be honest to say there are limitations to this book. I'm under no illusion that it's going to speak to everyone's, you know, interior world or to everyone's connection with God or the divine. And so it's important, I think, to kind of lift the veil back a bit about who I am as not some distant, sage like figure. I'm a 33-year-old Black woman living in upstate New York. Some days I wake up and I believe in God, some days I don't. And and for people to kind of meet that person and then enter the text, enter the words with whatever kind of trust I've earned. And if that's a little bit of trust, that's fine. And if it's greater trust, that's fine. Um, but I think it was important to me to kind of include those letters to peel back that curtain some. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that. Now, speaking of letters, this book is written in a way that, as well, you already know it because you wrote it, but as I was acknowledging before we came on, that it's broken down into sections, and there are different topics and things like that you talk about. So, wherein some people might just take it and read it like from cover to cover, like other books, this isn't necessarily meant to be read in that way. It's something to be absorbed, and looking at the different topics. I told you there are some things that came up for me that I know I need to go back and like really dive into. So I did not read the second line, but it's Black Liturgies, Prayers, Poems, and Meditations for Staying Human. And the book is exactly that. So structurally, what can people look for when they pick up Black Liturgies?
Yeah, so the book is broken into two sections, two main parts by story, which is kind of the shared stories that I was talking about, the shared things that make us human, the grief, the fear, the rage, the stories of dignity, of mortality. Um, those liturgies are in the first section and contain a letter. Um, from me, a poem, typically written by me, but there are some by others as well, breath practice, and questions for kind of reflection or journaling, and then a selection of prayers for each of those topics. And then the second part of the book is organized by time, and that's kind of the the cycles and rituals of life, and so that it contains seasonal liturgies for things like um, Juneteenth or a homegoing service or the birth of a child, or even throughout the day, there's a morning, a midday, and a evening type liturgy that you can kind of journey through. And the second half of the book, it's a lot more call and response type prayer. Um, and the first part, I think there's some of that, there's opportunity for that, as well in confession and forgiveness sections.
Yes, and that's what I really love because, in the prayers, and we'll get into some of the sections here momentarily, but in the prayers, it's like, okay, here's a specific prayer that I can say if I'm dealing with a certain thing. And that's why I was saying earlier that not necessarily to just take it and read it as a whole, even though I was doing that, actually listening to the audio, which Cole is reading, and she has a very soothing voice. So if you like audio, please pick that up because it's just good to hear her voice. But it's one of those things that I know I will return to because it may depend on what I'm going through on a given day, in a given moment of a given day. And so was that kind of the idea?
Yes, absolutely, that people could kind of enter and exit as it feels right for them, and to know that, even within the sections, some parts of, if you are in a season where you need to think about secrets, maybe the questions for kind of contemplation or reflection interest you, but the prayers might not, and that's okay, or the poetry might not necessarily resonate, but I think I wanted to create a very kind of open-handed space that people can go where it feels right and where it feels meaningful when it feels meaningful. And, if there are places in the book you never touch, that's, fine by me. Yeah.
Right. And maybe somebody that you can share it with and bless them with, because this is a book I'm already thinking of at least one or two people that I want to share it with for that very reason. Just because it's a different voice from what you may hear normally. I'm going to go through what some of the areas are, and then I have some specific ones that I just really spoke to me that I'd like for us to touch on. So we have things like dignity, selfhood, place, artistry, calling, your body, a sense of belonging, lament, fear, rage, secrets, power, rest, justice, love, memory, mortality. So as you can see, but then that's just a few of them. There are actually 21 different chapters in that particular portion. And then for the ones by time, there are 22. But as you can see, it just really depends on what you're going through, what you might actually want to read or embrace or encounter. So in your process of putting this all together, how long did it take you? Because this is very, y'all see I have a lot of tabs and stuff, but this is very, very extensive, number one. And in order for you to write this means that you had to really personally dive into all of these different areas. So what was the process of pulling it together like for you,
Mhm.
Cole?
Yeah, it was, well, I had written out the kind of structure of the sections and the chapters when I proposed the book to the publisher, so very early on, and then I should have started writing. And a
Mhm.
month went by, and 3 months went by, and 5 months went by, and, um, I was just in a ho it was just a difficult season for me to write in. I was in a really, difficult place personally, and just couldn't do it, couldn't pick up the pen, and so I, got to a place I'd pushed back my, deadline, and I was like, "I can't push it back again," and I just happened to look at the calendar. I'm like, "Alright, how many days do I have left?" And, um, I finally felt ready, and that was with 42 days left.
Oh,
So
wow.
that time, I just mapped out. I still have the little note, my notes app where I was like, "How could you do this? Is it possible?" And I've always been a bit of a fast writer. Once it comes, and I struggle with momentum, starting and stopping. So once I start, it's very difficult for me to stop, and so thankfully it all came. And I think that's because if I would have forced it earlier, I think the book probably would have been less honest. And
Mhm.
um and so I'm in some ways I'm glad I waited. I don't think everyone should. That's not everyone's process. I just happen
Mhm.
to be a bit of a faster writer. But they're topics that thankfully I had been thinking about
Okay.
for years, and especially through the community on the Black Liturgies community online
Right.
and the digital space. Um, I didn't have to really reimagine a whole lot. Of course, most of the liturgies are new, but the topics themselves are things that I feel like we've been journeying through and people have been challenging me on and, asking me questions about either in the Patreon community or, so the thoughts were very alive in me.
All right. Well, that's good because when you said 42 days, you saw me looking like that's a lot. That's a lot, just because each thing is so expansive. And even in the prayers, it's like they are prayers that can cover a lot of different people. So I'm just thinking, okay, yeah, I can formulate a prayer for myself, but to be able to think through and put myself in the place of another person who may have a different experience and be able to pray in that person's voice, so to speak. I can imagine that was definitely had to be inspired.
Yeah, yeah, it is very I feel like it's a different kind of, yeah, it was like a different level of daunting to know that I'm trying to speak to not a monolith, we're not a monolith, but I'm trying to practice imagination for what's happening and, not just in me, but in my sister and in my grandma and in my great-great-grandma and all of these people and knowing I'll never quite get it completely right, but, Toni Morrison talks about that practice of imagination for the interior worlds of her ancestors and how
Mhm.
they actually that are her entrance into her own inner life and in some way illuminate what's happening in her, that kind of journey of imagination. Um, and I found that to be the case, but it's scary. It's a scary
Mm,
thing. It requires, I think, a healthy arrogance and confidence to think, "Okay, I'm gonna write for us. I'm gonna write in a for a collective voice and believe I can speak to it in some way."
yes. And we have a comment from Sherry Tolliver. Thank you for being honest about your process. I can so relate to those issues. It's encouraging to know that even with those challenges, you can come out with a finished project and honor your vision.
Mm.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thanks,
And she's
Sherry.
like, yes, healthy arrogance. Yes, yes, because I mean, and I love that, and I'm probably going to, I'm not going to say I'm going to steal it, but I'm going to remember it just because, and well, I'm just going to skip ahead. I wasn't going to go here first, but I'm going to go here now because it's kind of coming up when you talk about calling. I mean, the thing of it is, if God, the creator has given you a thing that's meant for you to do, for you to bring forth into the world, there is a certain level of healthy arrogance that you have to be able to say, this was given to me and I know this is mine and I know that I can accomplish this because I have the tools to make it happen.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. So in calling, you do talk about people, there's always this thing of calling in spiritual communities. Like, what are you called to do? What are you supposed to do? How are you going to impact the world? So in talking about calling in the book, what is it specifically that you wanted people to understand about what it means to have a calling, or maybe even sometimes struggle with knowing what their calling is?
Yeah, I think for me, I, I've never been someone who felt a kind of strong connection to God, like, or, people who have experiences of hearing God or feeling like God's telling them to do something. I personally haven't had experiences like that, and so the concept of calling, I think, has felt alienating to me in the sense of, well, how do I know? How do I know I'm called? I'm not hearing anything, I mentioned, being a person of more doubt than certainty. Um, and I think that's true in this realm, and so I think I wanted to get at a calling that maybe doesn't require so much clarity always or clarity in the way we see it, but are there some core things that we're called to, like dignity, like beauty, like goodness, that might not sound like a particular career,
Right.
that we can kind of expand. For some people, it might be a career, but we can expand that a bit and and reimagine what it means to kind of be called.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
Right, because then one of the contemplation questions, is there a calling that you feel is primary in your life? Work, family, service, play, love. And I love the fact that you framed it that way, because when we do think of calling, we often do think of some type of work, whether it is a job or career, or whether it's, oh, I have a calling to do XYZ in the church or in a spiritual way. But I love the fact that you expanded that vision to be more than just the traditional ways that people might think of a calling.
Yes. And I'll say this, there's a tricky thing that happens in religious spaces, specifically when you talk about calling, is they can be used when it's completely reduced to what work you do. It can really become a tool of, you know, capitalist appetite that has you on a constant grind where you feel this responsibility to work yourself to the ground because it's in some way connected to this um experience or like mission you feel like you're on because of God or the divine. And I think that's beautiful that people feel that sense of purpose, but it's dangerous when we completely isolate that to, okay, well, what kind of work are you called to do? Because you have a lot of people making sacrifices, sacrificing their bodies, Black women
Mhm.
sacrificing their bodies because they feel called to maybe help someone or help a church or start this thing. And we end up, you know, sacrificing our bodies on altars of productivity and utility when really, you know, if we listened, we might be called to rest and to play and to be
You sound like
yeah.
call to rest. Yes, that is so powerful, because just especially here in the United States, it's always been about our labor.
Mhm,
Always, and continues to be about our labor, and never necessarily about our ability to rest or just be. I often will say, I don't want to just be a human doing, I want to be a human being. And
mhm,
that plays into that, because I personally feel that there are things about our personalities or the way we move in the world that are a part of calling. You know what I mean?
mhm.
Because there, it could be a sense of humor or something like that. It can be so
Yeah.
many different things. So just have a question. Name one thing you've learned new that you would apply today in your life after writing the book that you wish you'd learned earlier in your life.
Mm, that's a good question. I wish I knew. So I've always been a bit of a loner. I'm shy and if people think I'm shy now, if they met 6-year-old Cole, they wouldn't. I don't even hold a candle. I didn't speak, and I wrote. You know, I wrote more than I spoke when I was little, and um, in that way, writing for me was very solitary. And I had this impression of a writer as this individual kind of loner type figure, you know, that has been kind of regurgitated in art and film and all of that. And I
Mhm.
think in writing this book, having to rely on other people and incorporate the words of other people, there's a lot of words of wisdom that preface sections from
Mhm.
ancestors and poets and it made me realize that writing isn't really that much of a solitary endeavor, that I won't survive as a writer without community that is can be trusted and safe arms. It's very difficult to do alone, and, I wish I would have known that when I was younger, that I didn't have to retreat away from everyone in order to create something beautiful.
Mhm. That's powerful, because they say no man is an island, man or woman is an island unto themselves. So yes, I love
Mhm,
that. Thanks for that question, misunderstanding. I appreciate that. And speaking of the self, there is a chapter that really talks about selfhood and what it means to define who you are, and the fact that sometimes who you are, it can be multiple things. Multiple things can exist all at one time, all in one person. So, what is it that you wanted to really bring to light about what it means to define yourself in whatever way that means?
Yeah, I think a few things. I'm very interested in the idea of our selfhoods not being completely static, that we can change, we can be fluid, and that there can be room for that, and that the journey to kind of knowing the self is just this constant listening, as Howard Thurman describes it, listening for the sound of the genuine, and it might sound different in certain seasons. Um, but I also included that section in large part because I of the ways that I think we as humans in general tend to wear masks and tend to hide ourselves, not just from other people, but from ourselves. You know, Richard Wright says that the whole of life is man's frantic attempt trying to hide themselves from themselves. Um, and knowing that as we encounter what's happening in us, as we actually kind of make the journey and figure out what's happening with me, who am I, that there's a kind of liberation in that alone and knowing yourself and kind of saying your own name and believing who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And it changes how you're loved and how you're able to love. And I said this in This Here Flesh that I think if any love you receive while you're masked, you know, and putting on a mask is only affirmation that unmasked, you're unlovable. It doesn't make it to it doesn't actually make it to you when there's this barrier between you and the other person. And so part of the task of kind of journeying into the true self, it has everything to do with me, but it also has everything to do with the people I love, with my sister,
Right.
with my neighbor. Being able to meet me is in some ways helping me to meet other people. Yeah.
Mhm. And there's a vulnerability in, embracing your true self, that your ever evolving self.
Mhm.
And, and maybe think of the next thing. And I'm not doing this in order because, of course, the book doesn't, depends on what you're dealing with. But that leads me to fear because oftentimes people don't embrace or want to be fully expressive of who they are in their true self because of fear.
Yes.
Fear of how they're going to be perceived, or are you going to be rejected, are people, whatever's going to happen because of what someone on the outside may have to say about it. So, and that can apply to our Blackness, for those who may be queer, for those who may be living with disabilities, all those sorts of things. Just a full expression of who you are and what you feel and what you think. To be able to say that or express it, there's fear involved with that. So you
Mm.
do address fear in the book as well.
Mhm. Yeah.
So what is it that you want us to be able to take away when thinking about fear?
Yeah. I think of fear, this is something really that I learned from my father, of not demonizing my fear. Um,
Mhm.
and I think the world does a lot in our yeah, we do a lot to try to set up fear as this thing that needs to be conquered or defeated, and my
Mhm.
father would say, you know, "Let the fear in, just don't let it control you." Asada
Mm.
Shakur says something, I mean, he isn't much of a reader and wouldn't know this, but Asada Shakur says something similar of like, you know, people will say fear is dangerous, but sometimes the absence of fear is
Mm.
dangerous, and that, you know, fear is healthy when you're dealing with America, when you're dealing with the
Right?
society that we're in. And so I wanted to kind of complicate how we think of fear a little bit, to know that sometimes there's an intuition in us and this protective nature to fear that actually has to do with a wisdom, you know, and the kind of fear that we should be resisting is a fear that's not out of wisdom, you know, but that's more of a fear of bondage that's trying to hold you captive to one way of existing in the world. And I think differentiating those is helpful because I'm a very afraid person. I say I'm afraid of everything. I've always been. I'm just scared of life. And for those of us who are, for those of us who, you know, are afraid because we've had real credible things to fear. I think we can
Mhm.
be easy with us instead of trying to accomplish some, I don't know, the myth of fearlessness and this kind of rugged heroism or kind of bravado that we're taught to try
Right.
to demonstrate, to know there's a kind of courage that can be accessed while fear exists. Some would say, many others have said that if you're not afraid, it's not actually courage, that
Mm.
and that courage is actually doing something even in the presence of fear, um, which I find really beautiful. Yeah.
Mm. That leads me that is powerful because 'cause I'm thinking, "Hey, to be honest with you all, for me to do this, what I'm doing right now, it's fearful. There's fear involved in it. I mean, there's a comfort that has come over time, but Brown Girl Collective, as I mentioned earlier on, will be 15 in July, and I didn't start doing this until 4 years ago. So, I knew I wanted to do things to support Black women, to share Black women's stories, to talk about history, all those sorts of things. But I had a certain level of fear of being in this space because there are a whole lot of voices in this digital space, and maybe they
Mhm.
might be more polished than I am, or they may have a big team, or they may have a lot of money, or they may have gone to school to learn certain things to put them in this space. But I back to that whole calling or belief in something that I knew that I was supposed to do. I said
Mhm.
I don't have to fight through the fear and do it anyway.
Yeah.
And a couple of, I like in your brief section in the fear chapter, the inhale is, I will not be silenced by fear. To
Mhm.
exhale, a quivering voice is still sacred. Inhale, God, my soul trembles. Exhale, steady me in your arms. Um, Inhale, I will meet this fear with rest. Exhale, God, steady me in your arms. So that's just, I mean, I didn't do the breathing part, but that is just something that is important. Sometimes it's just what you have to do. We have
Yes.
another question. How do you ladies handle fear when it presents itself at certain moments?
Mm. Yeah. For me, I try to well, how I used to handle fear was, like, run, hide. Now and then I moved from that to, like, conquer it, like, let me just push through,
Mhm.
and now I think I handle it with a little more curiosity. I try to think, "Okay, what what stories are present in this fear?" If I'm afraid, there's a story behind it, and often that story is better met with kind of mercy and compassion than, self-loathing or a pep talk to just keep going. So I try to become curious and figure out if the fear is real, if it's communicating something true that I actually should be cautious of. And I try my best. I mean, I'm trying my best lately to really walk this balance between trusting my intuition and not giving myself over to anxiety. So I have to really ask a lot of questions to figure out if this is real. Is this a real fear? Is it actually a clear read of the situation? And there are times when, after that interrogation, after that kind of self-examination, that I still decide to hide. And there are times where I'm able to remain in a space or remain present to the fear despite it, do the thing afraid.
Right, right. That makes me think. I want to say it was Joyce Meyer wrote a book years ago, Do It Afraid.
Mm,
And for me, I think of it is, yes, all that you said is true, really, um, really doing the work and determining what that fear really is. And also making sure that if there is fear, that is your fear and not
mhm.
somebody else's,
Yes. Yeah.
because we could let the fears of our friends, our parents, our family, society, whatever, try to dictate how you should move in the world. And so it
Mhm.
should always be a conversation with you and your higher power, your God, to determine whether or not the move that you're looking to make is the right move for you to make. Barring all the other things that are safety and all of that, we realize
Yeah.
that. But if it's not a true safety issue, making sure that if it is a fear, it really is your fear and not someone else's.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
All right, and another comment for me, I learned more through fear. I found and discovered the miracle in me. Yes, that's good.
Beautiful.
Well, another thing I want to touch on, because this is something that oftentimes gets attributed to us as Black women, and that's the whole concept of being an angry Black woman
Mhm.
or experiencing rage or showing rage or anger. Just Black people in general, but there's this whole thing of angry Black women. So,
Mhm.
what is it that you want us to really be able to take? And actually, one of the prayers is for Black women, praying about anger
Mhm.
and rage. Why was it important for you to include it? Number one. Number two, what is one of the main things you want us to take away from learning how to deal with rage
Yeah.
and expression of it?
Yeah. I don't know if this will resonate with anyone who's listening. I think it might, but, I because of that trope of the angry Black woman that's been imposed on us, I kind of fled my anger. I grew to be very distant from my emotions in that way. I didn't I'm very guarded about expressing it because I don't wanna be reduced to anything. No one wants to be reduced to anything. And so, it took a while for me to kind of reclaim a healthy sense of anger, especially in spiritual spaces. I think anger is probably the emotion that's most demonized. We're taught that it's dangerous, it's something, again, to be conquered, that you don't wanna let it control you, and, you hear all of these words of caution um, and you hear so little of the capacity for beauty in anger, which I think exists when it's in protection of dignity, whether that's in protection of the dignity of people or yourself or the earth, or but when it's anger in defense and in protection in the midst of injustice, I think there's so much there and so many, you know, movements and moments of real change have happened because people were honest about that internal disruption. Um, so I wanted, if I was gonna write a prayer book, I didn't want it to be sanitized of that. I
Right.
wanted it to include the beauty of Black rage that has
Mm,
been demonized by a society that only has imagination for one kind of anger. I say that white supremacy has, it is not interested in our anger because it only can imagine how it practices its anger in the world. It only has imagination for the kind of anger that destroys and wants to degrade another human. And so when it encounters anyone else's anger, it dismisses it, it wants to shut it down. But I think what Audre Lorde and many others would say is our anger doesn't need to look like theirs.
right.
Audre Lorde says it's not the anger of Black women that's, launching bombs and spending,
Come on
you know,
now.
dollars on missiles and, dripping off of the globe like a diseased liquid bent upon the annihilation of us all. She says, "It's not our anger that does that." And I think that's an important reminder to know our practice of anger can be distinct and it can be beautiful, and it can actually be about protecting and preserving beauty as opposed to destroying. Yeah.
That is so powerful because it's true. People, some of the greatest movements, for our rights, human rights, civil rights, whatever, comes from people getting angry, righteous indignation. It comes from that. But, instead of demonizing it and making it like, oh, well, you're not supposed to be angry. You're just supposed to accept whatever happens to you and, just
Mhm.
smile and keep it and keep it pushing. No, there are opportunities, or it's important for us to be able to express all emotions. We should not be denied any type of emotion. But as you said,
Mm.
it benefits others when we don't show our anger or
Yeah.
when they immediately want to punish us whenever we do express some type of anger or rage.
Yes, exactly.
So, well, moving on, believe it or not, we've only got like 15 minutes left. Can you believe it? It's been
It's
such a
fast.
great conversation. So, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but the book also talks about rest. and how important it is for us to be able to rest. Once again, in this capitalistic society, a Black person being able to embrace rest or understand the importance of rest is something that is quite radical. And we know Trisha Hersey, Nap
Mhm.
Ministry, has written a lot about that. But I love that you also talk about our ability to rest. I'm just going to read this real quick because you don't have the book in front of you where you can read. I already got my stuff here, but the poem in that chapter, "The cocoon is not a cage. Your palm on your chest while your heart slows, your breath warming the air under your grandmother's quilt. You rest for everyone who couldn't, satin crown defiant. I wish I knew how silence sounds to you." That's beautiful.
Thank you.
The cocoon is not a cage. So, what is it that led you to name that particular poem, "The Cocoon is Not a Cage"?
Mhm. I mean, a lot of us experience, I think, rest as a risk because w many, have felt like they had to overwork and exhaust themselves in order to survive. And so, I mean, I'm thinking of my father, for example. He's a hustler, always has been, he's been working since he was 8,
Mm,
um, and always has had multiple jobs, multiple things, um, and for him, I used to, yell at him and say, "Dad, lie down, take a nap," like,
mm,
Can you just stop? Can you just be on vacation?" And I had to really come at it from the compassion of realizing, you know, there's stories at play here are reasons that feel like it's preventing him, that it feels like a threat. Rest feels like a threat to his ability to be free in the world, when in actuality, it's a bit of a paradox. It actually is a path
mm.
to liberation, but that's not how he's understood it. And that's not how many of us experience it before we do it. It feels like this risk. And I like that image of a cocoon, and that there is something about being confined that feels disorienting, that's different. You have to be still, but actually something beautiful is happening in that time of rest. And um, that's when we are renewed. When we dream, our memories are cemented. When we get into deep sleep, that's when our capacity to remember and all the things that happen through the day are moved around into short-term and long-term memory. Our bones, our muscles regenerate, all our cells regenerate, and so much renewal and growth and beauty happens in rest. And I feel like I was trying to get at that from that poem. Also, you mentioned Trisha Hersey, who I
Mhm.
adore and have been formed by, and she has a line in her book where she says, "I refuse to donate my body to a system that still owes a debt to my ancestors."
Mm.
Yes, I tell myself, I say that to myself, all the time since I read it in her book, because I think, eh when you realize that, when I say you rest for everyone who couldn't in that poem, when you realize that something is being set right as we practice and access rest now, that we're obviously you can't completely right the rest that's been withheld, the agency that's been withheld from Black bodies throughout time, but there's something defiant about it. There's something really subversive and beautiful about a Black woman at rest, and at rest unapologetically. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. To just take that time and to, yes, just reflect and to dream and all of those things. So thank you so much for sharing that. And it's also, I'm looking at some of the questions that you have. And this is something: what is your relationship to rest in the season? In addition to adequate sleeping, dream of other rituals of rest for yourself. So rest goes beyond, just sleep. Sometimes
Mhm.
it's just to sit and do absolutely nothing. Have to get out of the mindset that we always have to be doing something. And I'm
Mhm.
speaking to myself here as well, because I'm thinking of what I got to do when we get through in the next few minutes.
Mhm.
But there's nothing wrong with deciding, hey, I'm just going to Netflix and chill. That's okay. Whatever the case may be. So thank you for that. And I want to talk about joy. Black joy is a powerful thing. It's something that, even in the midst of some seemingly horrible circumstances, there's something of joy that we've always been able to access,
Mhm.
at different times. So just tell us a little bit about your sharing about joy in the book, in Black Liturgy.
Yes. Yeah, like you said, it's something that we've always been able to access. It's survival for us, I think it's no small way that we've learned to survive. And I think when I was writing this, I know the tendency that the world has to reduce Black life to pain and suffering, to reduce our story into just the most traumatic parts of the Black experience. And I had to try my best to resist that and to really display as much of all of us as I could, to say, yes, we come from pain, but we also come from beauty. And you think about um on plantations, the laughing barrels, and that the resistance of if you don't know, these barrels that enslaved people who weren't allowed to laugh, their laughing was policed. They would laugh into these barrels to hide their faces, and
Mm,
that defiance, the beauty of finding even a reason to like giggle to each other under impossible circumstances, I think is yeah, just something very unique and beautiful about Black life and Black connection.
mhm. And as you're saying that, one of the things that I thought about, it wasn't in the moment that it happened, but I'm thinking back to the summer and the whole brawl over.
Yes. Mhm.
You did see, you start laughing as soon as
I
I
know,
said
yeah.
it. All on the riverfront, the
Yeah.
whole thing of the folding chair. So yeah, when it happened, it wasn't a great thing. But right after it happened, you're looking at, all people got folding chair earrings now, and t-shirts with folding chairs on them, and they nicknamed the young man who was swimming across the river Aquaman. All these sorts of things. So I mean, it wasn't a good situation. What happened to that brother down there on the riverfront in
Mhm.
Montgomery? But we
We
found
found
a
a
way
way.
to find joy in the retelling of the story and reframing the story. So that's just one example that immediately came to mind.
That's so good. Yes, that is such a good example.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And last but not least, because we are in the month of love and a week away from Valentine's Day.
Mhm.
So, in the book, you also talk about love, but you talk about love in a broad form, not just romantic love, which, a lot of people are going to be focused on romance next week, but just the whole experience of love and what it really means to love and be loved. So, if anything, do you want us to take away from the chapter about love?
Yeah. The letter on love is really special. It's special to me. I was trying to communicate that feeling of being loved by someone that wants to save you,
Mm,
or loving someone that you want to save, and how sometimes we conflate saving with loving, and we think, "Oh, to love someone means I'm on a mission to kind of rescue them," and I think in my own life that has been really complicated. I live with depression, and, you know, I know what it is to be loved by someone who is desperate to save me and wants
mm,
just wants me to be okay, and being unable to give that to them, and actually that being more of a barrier than a place of connection. And I also know what it is to love someone so much that I want to save them, and so I wanted to get at that tension of, okay, if it's not that, what is it? And is it just presence? Is it I use the image of two people in the water in, deep at sea together, and it's the waves that connect you, to know that the same waves that move me move you, and I'm close enough to know that, as opposed to me trying to lift you up and over the waves to,
Mm,
send myself sinking, or, you know, I wanted to reimagine love in that way, as kind of presence, and even that drifting. It's like it lacks resolution, it's not final. Um, so that letter in particular was really, really special for me to write. Yeah.
mhm, mhm. And I love the questions, just a couple. You don't have to answer it. This is just so people can know what to expect. Like, what is your deepest love in this season? Something to think about. What is your deepest love in this season? Um, how do you distinguish the way you love those you know and those you don't know? Become curious about any distinctions. And also a very important one, because we often, when people go into therapy, one of the first things they want to ask you, say, tell us about your childhood, because there's so many things from our childhood that inform our lives. And one of the questions is, how was love demonstrated in your home when you were growing up? How has this formed you, either in resistance to or in alignment with those early experiences? So yeah, y'all. This is not, I mean, this is prayers, this is poems, this is letters and stories, but it's also some things for us to really dive in and think about some of these concepts and questions. And with that in mind, one of the last things that you have in the book is an opportunity for people who may need to create their own liturgies. So, how important was it for you to include that in the book as well?
Very important, for some of the reasons we spoke about earlier, about, me understanding the limitations of my own voice and my own lived experience. I know not all of the seasons I write to are going to resonate with everyone, and to, peel back the curtain a little bit behind how I write a liturgy, I think can help. I get a lot of DMs saying, "Oh, can you write a liturgy for this? Can you write a liturgy for that?" Which I love, and I tend to do when people ask me. But I'm much more interested when someone sends me, someone just sent me a prayer they wrote today. They said, "Oh, I wrote this liturgy using the template. I just wanted you
Mm,
to see it." And I was
yeah.
that's so special to me, because I think the way to resist the singularity of something like a Thomas Cranmer Book of Prayer that's written by one white man is not one Black woman, it's really a collective. And so if there were 100 more Black liturgies, that wouldn't be enough to me. I want more. I want more voices, and the more we can, yeah, share and practice that exchange, I think the better.
I love that, because as you were saying that, I'm thinking, oh, well, maybe that could be another book. Maybe you could edit a book with people, with the things that people share with you, and then that could be a book that's collective liturgies and poems and stories and things like that. Because I think that that's exciting as well, and it goes to show the power of your work, that people are actually taking the lessons and the instruction, and beginning to define those things for themselves, because sometimes our own personal experiences can be so uniquely ours, that it is good to be able to to have a prayer, or I think about affirmations. There's all these affirmation decks nowadays, and those are great, but what about being able to create your own ways to affirm yourself? So I love that, that you thought about that and included in the book. So we are at time, but before we go, I did want to ask you, what places are you going to be? What things you have coming up in the weeks ahead, that people can either come out and see you in person, or even other online events that people might be able to tap into?
Yes, I will be in Durham, North Carolina at Duke, and another university there. You can find it on my website, February 16th and 17th. So pretty soon, I'll be there if you're nearby. And then I will be in North Carolina. You can find that on the website, to Memphis in March. And then I am flying overseas to England,
Wow.
Oxford, and London if you happen to have any people who tune in from the UK. I'll be over
Mhm.
there for a few weeks, so that's what's coming up, and you're also welcome to follow me on, Instagram at Black Liturgies. I think my handles are down there,
Mhm.
if you wanna stay connected.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that. And yes, we do have people that watch from a variety of places. I actually had someone, I don't know if they were live, but they watched it later. They were in South Africa. So I'm like, okay, now we're international and on the continent, which is a beautiful thing. It's a
Yes.
very beautiful thing because, oftentimes when we start to tell our stories or talk about our experiences, we do realize that we're more alike than we are different. So I
Mhm.
always find it powerful when, women and, men as well from across the diaspora can tap into the conversations that we are having. So thank you
Yes.
to everyone who is here live and chimed in with your comments and your questions. It's always, a joy to have a conversation that is, it's not just the guest and myself, but you all as well to know that you are engaged. And I definitely do encourage you to go grab get your copy. It's New York Times bestseller. Get Black Liturgies. And where's my other one? And get, if you haven't already read it, This Here Flesh as well. Let's support Cole and the work that she's doing that is help here to liberate us all. And it's just important to continue to support her in any way that you can. I'm gonna throw the socials up here again so you can make sure that you're following her and tapping in, and whatever ways you can support her, please do so because she's doing very important work that is for the benefit of us all and helps us all to live well. So, Cole, you can just hold on for me for 1 second. I'm going to make an announcement for next week, but hold on for me for 1 second and I'll be back to you just to bid you adieu. So,
Sounds
thank you. All righty. Okay, everyone, that was a wonderful conversation. Okay, somebody, she's still in the background. She can see that she ordered both copies. So we have somebody. Thank you, Anna. I'm sure Cole appreciates that. Also, I do have a space through the Brown Girl Collective bookstore. If you choose to do so, that is a space where you can pick up books from all of the people that have the opportunity to interview. Brown Girl Collective bookstore.com. It takes you to bookshop. So if you want to get some of the books there and also support the work that is being done through Brown Girl Collective, we definitely appreciate that. So by means of announcement, next week, I know it's Valentine's Day and some folks will be out with their booze on Valentine's Day. But for those who may not be out or, or decide to watch it later. Oh, and Sherry's saying she's going to get the book and see you at Duke, Cole. So keep that in mind. You can't see her, but she's smiling. So next week we're actually going to talk about heart health because this is still Heart Health Month, and we didn't want to get through the month out having any types of conversation about it. So next week's guest is Waukesha, known as Keisha Stewart, whose book is Sonata for a Damaged Heart: A Young Mother's Journey of Survival After a Near Fatal Heart Attack. So she will be on just to talk about heart health. And she was a 2022 American Heart Association Go Red for Women national spokesperson. So she knows not only from personal experience, but she also has been, chosen by the American Heart Association to talk about heart health, Black women, and motherhood, and all of those great things. So please be on the lookout for that next week. If you are not all booed up on Valentine's Day, please do so, or you can always watch it after the fact because it remains up on social media. So thank you so much again for your time, and I look forward to seeing you again next week and in the weeks to come because we bring in the heat here at Live Well Sister and BGC Book Club. So thanks again for your time and your energy, and we look forward to seeing you again real soon. Take care. Bye-bye.